We're going to turn now to a dialogue with my great friend, Kirsten Gillibrand. I know you want to talk about
Heidi.
our favorite subject. I know you want to talk about our favorite subject, which is paid family leave. But I've been kind of bragging about you already this morning in the early stages because, first off, I want to tell you, I think that the work that you did in Iowa when you were running for president, where you actually spent time in rural Iowa, which resulted in a great piece of legislation that you've introduced for rural America. And I hope you can just give us some top lines on that. But I was talking about when you brought together people who didn't agree with you on the issue of abortion. A lot of our chat has been on that issue and how that issue has become kind of the dividing issue between urban and rural America. And so I'd love it if you would talk a little bit about your experiences in Iowa, how you came to this great bill that you've introduced, my friend, and talk a little bit about, I think at the time I called you and said you're a very courageous woman, and you said, no, I like the dialogue. I like listening. And so if you can just give us some of the insights that you learned from campaigning in Iowa before we get into paid family leave, that'd be great.
Well, thank you, Heidi, for your leadership. One Country's amazing, and the work you're doing here is transformational, and it's talking about what families across this country actually need, what businesses need, what communities need, and it is transformative. It's exactly the type of work that we need more of in the U.S. Senate, and we need more of in our country. So thank you for leading it. So when I was in Iowa, like I do in New York, I spent a lot of time traveling around to different counties, listening to families and communities and businesses is about what they needed to thrive. And a lot of the challenges were ones I'd heard a lot about in places like upstate New York. And they're the common sense things that people need to thrive. They need access to healthcare. Rural healthcare, it was a real challenge in Iowa. Maternal health. I talked to pregnant women who had to travel 40 miles, 45 miles just to get access to an OBGYN. And I could tell you, when you're pregnant, you need to go in several times a month to just be checked in. If you have to spend an hour and a half just driving to and from to get checked is a pain in the butt. Notwithstanding the day you have to give birth and having to know that you might be an hour away from actually being in front of the doctor that's going to deliver your baby is very stressful. So maternal health became a big issue, and access to rural health. Access to capital, making sure that when you wanted to start your business, you had a lender who understood your business. Heidi and I worked really hard with USDA to make sure that there was always a funding stream for value-added businesses that farmers would have. So like if you were a dairy farmer, that you could be a yogurt producer, or if you were an orchard and you grew apples, that you could create sliced apples for the local school system or hospital network. Just these kinds of ways to create business plans and business funding, and access to capital. Education, pipeline education, so that businesses would have the workers that they need, and building pipeline education through community colleges and local state schools with local businesses like manufacturers or companies to build the curriculum that they needed. Ag policies that made sense in terms of making sure that they had not only the type of support they need, but also the type of programming that made a sense. And so it was a really diverse set of principles that were a 360-degree view of what does rural America need to thrive. And it also included these economic safety net support ideas about things as simple as affordable daycare or universal PreK or a national paid leave plan. That we saw such a crisis in this basic infrastructure around the economy that people couldn't be working if they didn't have that support around them. We saw daycare, something as simple as daycare, as a problem. In upstate New York, for every one kid that needed daycare, for every 4 kids that needed daycare, there was 1 slot before the pandemic. Post-pandemic, 1 slot for every 8 kids. When I visited North Dakota with Heidi, we went to communities where families were on wait lists for 2 years just to get a slot at a local daycare for their child. And that meant a parent couldn't go to work for 2 years, or they'd have to use informal care, which wasn't as reliable, particularly if the caregiver got sick. So these are the sort of the supports around what I saw that was necessary for rural development and rural growth and thriving. That I created a big rural economic platform that was really important for my presidential platform, and a lot of that got sucked up into some stuff that Biden's doing right now. And then both in the infrastructure side to make sure that we do care about things as simple as rural broadband, to care about roads and bridges and clean water, stuff that rural America cares about just as much as anybody else. And then also these softer pieces of infrastructure, which includes paid leave. So that's what we worked on, and it's as relevant today as it was 2 years ago. And there's stuff that I'm trying to get in our Build Back Better agenda right now.
Okay. Can you just give a little recount of your experience in discussing probably one of the most contentious issues in rural America, which is women's reproductive rights, the access to abortion, and your fearless leadership in stepping into that issue and not running away from it when you were in Iowa? I've just always been so impressed with that, Kirsten.
Yeah, so reproductive rights obviously is something that matters to everyone. And, you know, when you go into a community that's deeply religious, it's still just as important, but how we talk about it is equally as important. I remember going into Iowa and speaking with a woman of great faith, and you know, she said, "I'm concerned about reproductive care, and I'm concerned about, you know, Democrats, that they support abortion, and I'm concerned that they don't share my values." And I said to her, I said, you know, I am also a woman of deep faith, and I am a Christian, and I believe that God has a role for all of us to play. But I also know that, you know, God gives us free will. And I believe that it is the role of the faith community to spread their faith and what they believe in, but not to impose our faith on people who do not share that faith. So while I respect your view and your interest in sharing with people why you would want people to take a pregnancy to term, I don't expect anyone to impose their faith on anyone else. And so I believe in free will, and I believe in the right of every person to make that choice based on her own faith, based on her own circumstance, and decide when a woman is going to have children and how many and under what circumstance. And the woman respected that. And she said, you know, I may disagree with where we come down on this, but I can at least respect where you come from it. And I think that is all we can do, to at least respect one another, where we come at a decision, where we see a problem, and where we find solutions. And so I think in these issues that are seen as divisive, I think the most important thing we can do first is listen and find out where someone is coming from, how they see an issue, why they see it a certain way, and then share as best we can how we see the issue and why we see it the way we see it. And that's what I try to do in New York, whether I'm upstate or downstate or anywhere in between.
Yeah, I mean, people forget how truly regionally diverse New York is, and you came out of a more rural centric district, and before you became a senator for all of New York, and I think that is a wonderful resume for kind of what it takes to reunite the country, urban to rural. And so I just really applaud all the great work that you're doing. And for those who don't know, you're on the Ag Committee and have been on the Ag Committee since the very beginning. And
since day one, 14 years now. In the House, I was on Ag for 2 years, and now in the Senate, I've been on it for 12.
I know, and a leader. So let's turn to paid family leave. And before we do that, there's a letter to the editor in the Fargo Forum written by a woman, union member, down in Gwinner. She works putting together bobcats, manufacturing and rolling those bobcat skid steer loaders. And she and her husband recently found great joy in becoming, hey there, great joy in,
It's Maple.
yeah, great joy in becoming foster parents. And she wrote an open letter to the governor, and she said, we were just offered an opportunity to foster a young child, and we were so excited. we immediately called around to see where we could find daycare. We could not find one slot for daycare. And as a result, that child did not have an opportunity to be fostered in a rural community among a loving parents, two loving foster parents, and they just had to say no because they have to also earn a living. And so it boils my blood when people say that daycare and things like paid family leave are not part of a critical infrastructure for the economy in this country, because it is preventing us from achieving really great things economically, in my opinion. And so talk a little bit about how you got into paid family leave, why you have become a national leader on this issue, and what audiences like One Country can do to help you get it across the finish line.
So, I started looking at this issue of paid leave almost a decade ago, and what I recognized is that paid leave was only accessible to the wealthiest of Americans, the smallest percentage. Today, it's about 20% of workers have access to paid leave. It tends to be the lawyers and the doctors and the accountants, the people in very, very highly paid industries where companies are extremely successful. And so they really want to retain their workers, particularly their female workers. And so they offer these big incentives like paid leave, and they'll pay them their full salary up for 3 months, sometimes 6 months, just to keep them. But for a lower wage worker, paid leave is impossible. Now, some states have started to offer it, like California has offered it for 10 years. New York's just started offering it a couple of years ago, and a few others. And now we have a lot of data about what businesses think about paid leave and whether it works. And it works really well. California has said 90% of businesses said it had no negative impact on their bottom line or a positive impact. And 99% said it had a great impact on retention and morale. And so we know it's good for the business community. We also know it's good for workers, because think about what paid leave's for. It's for a new mom who wants to nurse her child or just learn how to be a parent and bond with a baby for the first few months. It's for a worker whose mother or father is dying and you need to be on their bedside to help them, to just nurse them, help them, whatever needs to happen in those last few months. It's for a family member to take care of another family member in this era of COVID, to be with someone who has COVID, God forbid, on a ventilator, and to just take care of a loved one. If you can't take paid leave because you can't lose your job and you don't get paid, you could take unpaid leave, and you don't have enough money to take unpaid leave. What that means is you're going to stay at work and you're going to be miserable because you're going to be worrying about the family member who needs your care, or the baby at home with someone who is not you. And so that's the reality. And if we want our workers to be performing at their highest and best, then we should want paid leave. We've also seen what COVID has done to the economy. It's really hit women the hardest. 5 million women had to leave the workforce because of COVID. And even since we've been recovering, last month, over 200,000 women left the workforce and over 140,000 men came into the workforce. Women are still having to quit because childcare isn't reestablished. A lot of childcare centers haven't reopened. Not all schools have reopened. Schools have had closures because of COVID epidemics and still spreading. And so women have disproportionately been hit because there's no care. If you had paid leave, you could leave your work for a certain amount of time, meet that need, and then not lose your job, not lose your paycheck, and not lose a beat. That would be able to be something that employers could sustain, because they wouldn't have to pay your salary during that time. Your paid leave would pay your salary. They could pay a replacement worker as needed. And then they wouldn't have to they wouldn't have to actually replace you, which is really expensive and time consuming, because you're going to come right back after the couple of weeks that you need to meet that need. So it makes sense and it works. And we're literally the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't have it. And a small state like North Dakota could never offer paid leave because they don't have the economies of scale. So a small business in a small state like North Dakota could never compete with an Amazon or a big company that could offer it if they wanted to, because they just don't have the resources. So if a small business wants to compete with a big business, the only way to do it is a national program. Well, so that's why it's so important to fight for it.
it was interesting because you so graciously came out and really helped us drum up some support. And we went to a community that very, very conservative community. And I talked about why I was supporting this. It was a group of women, and these conservative women kind of started out, really another government program. And then as I explained it and said, look, this is going to keep people in the workforce. It's going to keep people from losing their job and from accessing other forms of support from the government. This is a pro-work policy. This
Very
is
much
something
so.
that's gonna, and then I explained that if you're running a small tech startup and you're trying to recruit some really good talent to help you code and engineer your program, how do you compete with Google that will give you 6 months paid family leave if you're pregnant? I mean,
Totally.
male or female.
Can't.
You,
Yep.
you can't. And so this is really a very, very much a pro small business program. And when we have the chance to go out to conservative rural parts and we actually talk about this, we win hearts and minds. And I think the two of us were pretty persuasive because we ended up with a lot of support in a state like North Dakota. And I really hope that you guys are able to get this across the finish line. I think it is so important for keeping innovation and diversity in the workforce because, as you said, women have been dramatically hurt by
Yep.
the pandemic. We've become not only, the teachers of our children, the daycare provider,
Mhm.
but we're still trying to do our job every day.
Totally.
So,
And you talk to business owners around the country right now, they're going to tell you about worker shortages. They're going to tell you they can't get the people back to work. Well, unless you deal with this fundamental infrastructure need of daycare and childcare, if you don't deal with this problem, you're never going to get most of the women back to work. Like you just can't. And it's basic infrastructure. It's like when we decided 100 years ago you needed to provide phone service for everybody, that people couldn't do that on their own. They couldn't provide water service on their own. They couldn't provide roads and bridges on their own. And we decided as a government, we have to provide that basic infrastructure because no one person could afford it themselves. Well, now the data is all in. You can't provide daycare to workers economically. It's not something a low wage or even a middle income worker can afford because it's already as cheaply offered as possible. Today, a daycare worker is paid the smallest amount possible, less than minimum wage. And you don't want the smallest amount possible being paid to the person looking after your child. You want a better wage for someone who's going to literally protect your child all day long and educate your child all day long. So, and that still just even the smallest margins, the cost of daycare is so expensive. Most people are paying, low income workers are paying 30% of their income, sometimes 50% of their income just for childcare. That's out of whack. And so now the social scientists have done all the number crunching and said, this actually can't be offered to low and middle income workers without the support of some kind of government. And so it's infrastructure. It's the critical basic economic infrastructure to get everyone who wants to be working. It's the same as phone lines and water systems. You have to provide it. And if you don't subsidize it just a little bit, then low income workers will never have it. And that you'll keep having shortages of people who work in restaurants, people who work in hotels, people who drive buses, nurses. You're going to continue to have these shortages of industries that are desperate for workers because women are not able to go back to work. Many people have been unable to go back to work because this infrastructure has collapsed.
yeah,
So we have to rebuild it.
I think it's so interesting because you look at, and well, I am being critical at Republican governors who said, oh, the reason why people aren't going back to work is because we've given them too many benefits in the unemployment system. Guess what? When in their states, when they rolled those benefits back, people still didn't go back to work. And I want to say, why does it take a genius to explain to you that this is about daycare? That this is about wages. This is about whether, in fact, it is meaningful for people to go back to work. The one thing that the pandemic taught people, I think, is that they can get by with less.
Yep.
And when they decided we can get by with less, not accessing government programs necessarily, but just living differently, we can get by with less. Then all of a sudden they say, maybe unless I can make a plausible economic argument that going back to work will help me economically, I'm going to stay home and take care of my kids.
Right.
And it's
And
just
if there is, and the other option is that if I can't afford the daycare because you can't, then I need a much higher paying job to be able to justify working. I have to be able to pay for the daycare. Otherwise I can't. It's like, it's a catch-22. And so my view is if you want the economy to really be working on all cylinders, get everybody working to their highest capability and make sure the basic needs of the economy are there, which includes schools, and schools should include pre-K and K, because if you have public schools that cover age 3 and 4, you don't have to worry about that. You're applying really good, high quality standards for education early. And every social scientist knows every dollar you put into early childhood education is $11 or $12 out in the lifetime of that child, because they are going to be that much more functional. You talk to law enforcement, they will tell you if you don't give a kid early childhood education at 3 and 4, they're more likely to drop out of school and have a criminal record. So law enforcement will tell you how important pre-K is, because they see it in what happens to the kids over time, whether they stay in high school and whether they continue their education. So that's the truth. It's every dollar you put into early childhood helps you have great kids and great adults who give back to the economy, give back to their communities.
So, Kirsten, I want to turn to something that has vexed all of us, which is the slide of the Democratic Party in rural America. That it's becoming harder and harder to win in places like Iowa and Western Pennsylvania. You know, Iowa voted for Barack Obama twice, and now I think a recent poll showed that 53% of people polled in Iowa would support the former president. Yeah. So that's not the Iowa of 10 years ago. Yeah. So as a United States senators have incredible reach and access. How do you think the Senate could collectively work to bring a better awareness in rural America about the positive things about the Democratic Party agenda?
I think we need to talk about the people we're serving and how we're helping them. And, you know, too many people get stuck in Washington and talking like Washington speak about how much they're spending and how they're paying for it, as opposed to what they're doing. So like, you know, what we're trying to do is make the economy work. We're trying to help people get better paying jobs so they can provide for their kids. We're trying to make sure that people can have affordable daycare and can actually send their kids to a good public pre-K and have things like paid leave. Like, this is what we're working on, as well as building the roads and the bridges and the rural broadband. Like, talk about what we're doing for who and why. And that's all we should ever be talking about. And when we get stuck inside the Beltway, it doesn't make sense to regular people. If you ask anybody in America, what are the Democrats and Republicans fighting about? They'll say, oh, they're fighting about 3.5 trillion. Like, nobody knows what it's about. They'll just say it's about a number. It's not about a number. It's about people. It's about what we're trying to do for families and small businesses and how to get them back open again and how to get families thriving again, what the impact of COVID was. So I guess what I would suggest, Heidi, is that we should all spend more time with you. We should go to places like North Dakota, listen to more people, talk to regular people about their lives and what we're doing. And we should definitely hold more town halls and more roundtables and just spend more time listening. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. That's a really good common sensey thing to remember. And so I think members of Congress lose their way when they get stuck too much inside the Beltway, and they only talk about the stuff that reporters ask them about. The reporters only ask you about inside baseball things, and it's not what regular people want to know. So spend more time home, less time here, and then find the common ground. The good news is we are getting there. I think we've been working very hard together with Senators Manchin and Sinema to find common ground on what pieces of this agenda are most important to all of America. And I think we will fund all of the ideas, meaning we'll fund the basic infrastructure along with the paid leave and the child care. and resources for housing and for clean air and clean water, and for probably some resources for job training to get people who are unemployed back working again. And that'll be what it looks like. It'll be just a bunch of big ideas about how to get everybody working who wants to be working and improve people's lives meaningfully.
And this is the trillion-dollar question. When will this get done? We had an earlier discussion. Mitch Landrieu made an impassioned plea for, please just get it done.
Done. I think by Thanksgiving. I'm hopeful that it all gets wrapped up by Thanksgiving. I think these packages and the votes could be in the next 3 weeks. So I don't think it has to be longer than that. I think we're very close. So I'd say in the next 3 weeks, but definitely by Thanksgiving.
Do you expect that once the package is put together and it really speaks to the needs of middle class and working Americans, that there'll be any Republican that will support this package, Kirsten?
No, I think it's the line's been drawn in the sand in a partisan way, that the work we are doing in this economic package, this agenda of how to build basically the support for people to be working effectively, that Mitch McConnell wants it to be just Democrats. And he's kind of sent that message to everybody that he doesn't want anyone else to work on that except for Democrats, which is fine. We were able to work with Republicans on the rural broadband and the roads and the bridges and the water systems. That's great. And I think it's enough to show America that there's lots we agree on, and then there's some other stuff where there's less agreement, but we ran on these issues and these are things we believe in, and we want the country to see what having more support for daycare looks like, what more support for paid leave looks like, what more support for job training looks like, so that they can say whether they believe in this or not and whether they want us to continue to govern or not. So I think it's fair. Mitch McConnell disagrees, and I'm okay with that. And so I think it's okay if it's just Democrats, because it's something we really believe in is important for the country.
Well, I think, in places like where you visited in North Dakota, where you can't find daycare, or a good-hearted couple wants to provide foster care and can't find daycare because it's out of the reach for someone to provide it in a rural community without, losing money. As you said, it's already
they cannot provide it without losing money. It's not economic. It's like there's some things, and this has to sink into people. There's some things that do not make money, okay? Some things do not make money. It's just the truth of the world. Some things do not make money. And you have to understand that. Building your own bridge is not going to make you money. Building your own road is not going to make you money. You have to recognize some things will not make money, and daycare is one of them. It can't make enough money unless it's only for rich people. And we want daycare for all workers.
Well, we have a few more minutes, and there's some questions coming in the chat, and I know you love to.
I do like questions.
You do. So one is, yes, why don't we see more events where President Biden is talking with people in communities that voted for his opponents, but would benefit from his proposals?
I think he did that when he went. He just went to Michigan. I think his goal of going to Michigan was to talk to people in parts of rural Michigan that did not vote for him. He should keep doing that. I support that, and if he wants me to travel with him or for him, I will. I love going to places where I make friends. I don't already have friends, and so I think all Democrats should do that, and they should do it regularly, because these are things. Again, the press isn't necessarily going to cover these things. We just need to tell people about them and tell them about them in the communities where they live. Well, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, and I'm always, I mean, this is, these are still your colleagues and you're working with them, but I don't get how somebody can vote against something and then be at the ribbon cutting. How somebody can take a victory lap on a great program and go visit a daycare center that they did nothing to make sure that that was available. And I think we need to call out folks who are, if they believe this is the wrong direction, then stand by your decision but don't take credit. And I think if we do not have a dialogue with especially in rural America, with what that agenda looks like, what we're doing to revitalize rural communities, what we're doing to bring economic opportunities to rural communities, if we don't do that, I don't know. I mean, we're just really bad at tooting our own horn, and
Yeah,
that
we are, and we also seem to be bad at just talking about what we're for, and just talking about the real things, not the complex policies and the ins and outs of the debates, but just the real things, and just talking to people about what their lives are like and what we and the ideas of ways to help, and listening to the ways people would like us to try to help. I always get my best ideas in the state. You never get them in Washington. You get your best ideas on conversations like this. So, just encouraging people to get out and about is the way to do it. I agree with you, Heidi, very much.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that once this happens, and I'm hoping it happens sooner rather than later, and there is really an opportunity to take that debate out of the halls of Congress and onto Main Street and stand and say, this is what we hope will happen. Building back small businesses, giving them an opportunity to recruit the best workers, getting better worker training, leading this transition to a carbon neutral economy, but also not leaving workers behind, which is something that I care deeply about. And so I just think that there needs to be more of all of you who all hands on deck, and as we look at what could happen in the midterms and then later in the next presidential election, we came very close to losing our democracy, in my opinion. And so the stakes could not be higher to make sure that we're offering a viable alternative.
You're absolutely right. And people do have to make a choice at the end of the day. So we're going to try, once we can finish this work, we're going to try to protect our democracy. We're going to have a vote this week on voting rights, the bill that Senator Manchin helped write, to see if we get any Republican support. We might get 1 or 2 votes. I don't think we'll get 60, but I think it's worth continuing to have a conversation with the American people that protecting voting rights matters. And I think we'll have that vote this week again. And then hopefully in the next 3 weeks, we'll have our vote on childcare and workforce training.
In the chat, Kirsten, when is Senator Gillibrand coming back to Sioux City?
Whenever you invite me, I would like to come. So let me know when there's a good time to come, some big Dem party that I could come to, or some big bipartisan town hall. I'm happy to come to whatever you'd like to have me come to.
Well, and we are so grateful for the work that you're doing on behalf of women and children and really all of America to bring these important policies forward. I know your tenacity. I'm well familiar with it, and I always tell people, do not get between that woman and a good idea, because you'll get run over.
Yes, I don't let it go, and sometimes they take a long time. My military justice bill, I'm on year 8, and I have 66 co-sponsors now and 219 in the House. So I'm over a majority in both, and it's still going to be taken out in conference by the chairman, but I will hopefully get an up or down floor vote to rectify that.
Well, go for it. It's all good. Thank you so much for joining us. Keep doing the important work that you're doing for so many Americans who don't have a voice and can't hire a lobbyist. Those are our people. And when we do that work and tell them what we've been doing, hopefully they'll want us to do more. And some of those those working class voters that we've lost as Democrats, and rural voters that we've lost as Democrats, will come back and see that the Democratic Party still shares their values and is the party of individual opportunity.
Agreed. Well said, Heidi. God bless and stay safe.
Take care.
Love you too. Bye.